Ever notice how two editors can use the exact same keyframes, the exact same graph, and somehow one animation looks smooth and professional, while the other feels stiff and lifeless? Most people think the secret is hidden inside these presets. But here's the weird thing. I've seen editors use the perfect graph and still end up with terrible looking motion. So what are they missing? The answer isn't the graph itself. It's understanding what the graph is actually controlling. Once you understand that, you'll stop guessing and start creating animations that feel intentional. To make this simple, I've split this video into 4 parts. First, we'll uncover how keyframe graphs actually work. Then we'll break down every graph preset and when to use them. After that, we'll build real animations step by step. And finally, I'll show you how to make those animations even smoother with a few tricks most beginners completely ignore. Let's start with the part that confuses almost everyone. How keyframe graphs actually work. Keyframes are simply points on a timeline that tell CapCut where something should be. Position, scale, rotation, and opacity. You've probably heard that explanation 100 times already. So instead of repeating it, let's jump straight to what actually matters, the graph. To explain this, I'm going to use a football. I'll place it here and create a transform keyframe. Let's call this point 1. Then I'll move 10 keyframes forward and drag the football straight upward. CapCut automatically creates a second keyframe. Let's call this point 2. At first glance, it looks simple. The football moves from here to here. But when I press Alt+K and open the graph editor, suddenly we're looking behind the scenes. Before we touch anything, there's something important you need to understand. This horizontal line is time, and this vertical line is value. In other words, the x-axis tells us when something happens. The y-axis tells us how much something changes. Now watch carefully, because this is where most people get confused. We only move the football on the y-axis. So let's open the Y graph. This line shows the entire journey between point 1 and point 2. The height represents how far the football moved. The width represents how long the movement took. Now here's where the magic starts. I'll select the second keyframe and activate this handle by pressing this icon. Most beginners see this handle and immediately start dragging it around, but almost nobody understands what it's actually doing. Watch what happens. If I pull it upward, look closely at the football. It actually moves beyond the final position. If I pull it downward, now it dips below the final position. Nothing random is happening here. The graph is literally drawing the path your values will follow. And once you understand that, suddenly every graph preset in CapCut starts making sense, because they're all built on the exact same principle. Every single one follows this same formula. So before moving on, spend a few minutes experimenting with these handles yourself, because the faster you understand this relationship, the easier every animation becomes. Now that we understand what graphs are actually controlling, let's look at the presets CapCut gives us. And this is where most editors make their first mistake. They choose graphs based on the name instead of choosing them based on what the object is supposed to do. Let's fix that. Let's start with the first category, the graphs that end with in. These are probably the easiest to understand because they all follow the same idea. They start slowly and gradually speed up. They're perfect when an object is entering the screen. Let's look at the first one, ease in. This is the most gentle version. The object starts slowly and gradually gains speed. Now here's the question. What if we want the object to feel heavier or more powerful? That's where quad in comes in. It starts even slower than ease in, but builds momentum much faster near the end. The difference might look small at first, but when you compare them side by side, quad in feels more intentional. Now let's push it even further. Cubic in. This one almost feels like it's being held back at the beginning, then suddenly it launches forward. If you want a dramatic entrance, this is usually the strongest choice. So instead of memorizing names, so remember this. Ease in, gentle acceleration. Quad in, stronger acceleration. Cubic in, aggressive acceleration. Now let's flip everything upside down. The next category is out, and these graphs do the exact opposite. Instead of starting slow and speeding up, they start fast and slow down. They're perfect when something is leaving the screen. Just like before, CapCut gives us 3 versions: ease out, quad out, and cubic out. Each one slows down differently. The stronger the graph, the more dramatic the slowdown becomes. Now we get to the category that most editors use for everyday motion, and for good reason: ease graphs. These combine both worlds. They start slow and speed up through the middle, and then slow down again before stopping. In other words, they feel natural. And natural movement is usually what makes animations look professional. CapCut gives us several variations: ease, quad ease, cubic ease, and circular ease. At first, they might seem almost identical, but if you watch carefully, each one changes how quickly the object accelerates and decelerates. The stronger the curve, the more energy the movement feels like it has. You may also notice rebound in and rebound out. These add a small bounce to the movement. They can be useful in specific situations, but honestly, if you're just learning keyframe graphs, don't worry about them yet. Master these three categories first, because once you understand why they behave differently, choosing the right graph becomes incredibly easy. And now that you know what every graph actually does, let's stop talking about theory, because theory is useless if you can't apply it. Let's build a real animation and see these graphs in action. Let's start with something simple. We're going to move this CapCut logo from the right side of the screen to the left. Sounds easy, right? But here's the interesting part. Most beginners can make it move. Very few can make it feel good. So let's see what actually happens. I'll place the logo on the timeline and move it off screen to the right. Then I'll move to the point where I want the animation to begin and create a transform keyframe. Next, I'll move forward 7 keyframes. Now I'll drag the logo to the other side of the screen. One important thing, don't accidentally change the Y position. We're only testing horizontal movement. Press Alt plus K to open the graph editor. Because we only changed the X position, we'll select the X component. Here's a question. Which graph would you choose? Think about it for a second. The logo is entering the screen. Should it start fast or start slow? Since the subject moves inside the screen, choose quad ease. Now the logo eases into motion, accelerates through the middle, and gently settles at the end. Nothing flashy, just smooth, and smooth is what we're aiming for. But let's make things a little more challenging, because real animations rarely move in only one direction. Let's create something that combines position, scale, and rotation at the same time. I'll place this subject at the top of the frame. First, I'll rotate it to 180 degrees. Then I'll reduce the scale to around 60%. Now it looks small, upside down, and completely out of place. I'll move to the point where the animation should begin and add a transform keyframe. Then I'll move forward 10 keyframes. This time, I'll rotate the object to 360 degrees. Now it completes a full flip. Next, I'll move it into its final position, and I'll return the scale back to 100%. At this point, the animation is technically finished, but if we play it, something feels off. The flip looks disconnected from the movement, almost like multiple animations fighting each other. Here's why. We're no longer controlling just one property, we're controlling 4. Position X, position Y, scale, and rotation. If one graph behaves differently from the others, the movement starts feeling inconsistent. So let's synchronize them. Open the graph editor with Alt plus K. We'll start with scale. Select the graph and apply quad ease. Now repeat the same thing for rotation. Then X, then Y. Every property now follows the same rhythm, and watch what happens. Suddenly the animation feels unified. The movement flows together. The rotation feels connected to the scale. The scale feels connected to the motion, and the entire animation feels intentional. Not because we added more keyframes, but because all the keyframes are speaking the same language. Now here's the problem. Even though this animation looks much better, it's still missing one thing. Weight. Real objects rarely stop perfectly. They overshoot, they settle, they bounce. And that's exactly what we're going to create next. Because this final trick is what separates a decent animation from one that feels professionally polished. Because here's the truth. Most animations don't look bad because of the graph. They look bad because they stop too perfectly. And real objects almost never do that. Think about throwing a ball onto the ground. It doesn't land and instantly freeze. It overshoots, it bounces, it settles. That's exactly what we're going to recreate. Let's start with our first animation. Right now it looks smooth, but it still feels a little artificial. So let's give it some weight. Move 2 keyframes forward from the final keyframe and create a new transform keyframe. Now go back to the middle keyframe. This is where we're going to trick the viewer's brain. Increase the scale by 2, then move the logo slightly farther in the direction it was already traveling. In our case, the object entered from the right, so push it slightly farther to the left. What we're creating here is called an overshoot. The object doesn't stop exactly where it should, it goes a little too far, then comes back. Now play it. Notice how much more natural it feels. We only change a few values, but suddenly the logo feels like it has momentum, like it actually weighs something. And this is the funny part. Most viewers will never notice the bounce itself. They'll just think the animation looks better. Now let's push things even further, because the second animation gives us more room to work with. This time, we're going to create a multi-stage bounce. Move 2 keyframes forward from the last keyframe and create another keyframe. Then move 3 keyframes forward and create one more. If we play it right now, nothing changes, and that's exactly what we want. Now let's shape the motion. Go to the second last keyframe, increase scale by 2, then add 2 degrees of rotation. Now move to the next keyframe. Reduce scale by 2 and subtract 1 degree of rotation. We're creating a correction movement. The object overshoots, then compensates, then settles, exactly like a real object would. Now play the animation. Notice how the landing suddenly feels alive, and that's usually the goal. Good motion motion graphics shouldn't scream for attention. They should simply feel right. But there's still one final ingredient, because even great keyframes can look slightly choppy, and that's motion blur. This is the effect that tricks our eyes into believing movement is faster and smoother than it actually is. Right-click your clip and select Create Compound Clip. Scroll down and enable motion blur. Keep it around 30. With motion blur, the movement feels cinematic. And that's the difference most viewers can feel even if they can't explain it. So if there's one thing I want you to remember from this entire video, it's this. Don't choose graphs randomly. Understand what they're controlling. Once you understand the relationship between time and value, every graph starts making sense. Now open CapCut, experiment with a few graphs, and try breaking things on purpose, because that's usually where the best animations come from. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.